On this episode of Teammate Talks, what I really wanted to talk about was honesty. So that's why we're talking about, are you really being honest with yourself? Because what I really want to delve into here is if you struggle with negative thoughts and self-doubt and things along those lines. So honesty, as we know, is being truthful with ourselves, but some of us use honesty as an excuse to be overly mean and overly brutal in the way that we frame what we are being honest about. So, and the problem is that we can even do this to ourselves, right? We can begin to say, "Well, I'm terrible at this, and I'm just being honest because I'm terrible at it," but without really looking at the facts versus opinions. Like, are you actually terrible at it, or do you just feel that way, right? So a lot of people who struggle with negative thoughts, being overly self-critical, overthinking, things along those lines, a lot of times that comes as a coping mechanism. It usually started off because someone in your life, someone in your past, was extremely critical of you, like hypercritical and mean about it. And you began to decide that if you could be more critical to yourself and, you know, cut them off essentially, and be even more critical than they were, then it would stop them from giving you such a hard time. It would stop them from being overly critical of you. I like to call it the 8 Mile syndrome. If you ever seen that movie, same kind of thing, right? And a lot of times when someone is overly self-critical, that's what it really comes down to, is a coping skill to try to prevent someone else from being so overly self-critical with you, right? So it's important to understand that, because then you can start looking at your negative thinking a little bit different. You can start to ask yourself, well, who in my past got me thinking that way? Who in my past would have said that? Who in my past does that voice belong to? Because it's not my voice, right? It's not my voice. Because in the end, you've got to be your own friend. But too many times, a lot of us, we say things to ourselves mentally. We think thoughts to ourselves that we would never say to a close friend, right? That we would never keep a friend that said to us. And yet we do it to ourselves all the time. And then we say, well, I'm just being honest with myself. Well, I wanted to talk about a few ways that you can tell if you're really being honest with yourself. And the first one, and this is a coping skill I learned several years ago that's helped me through a lot of tough times, is learning to be able to differentiate facts from opinions. Right. And this comes down to the framing effect. I've talked about the framing effect before, which is basically like how we frame a situation in our mind, how we describe a situation to ourselves changes our emotional response to that situation. So if we frame a situation as being extremely negative, or we catastrophize it, then that's the way we're going to see it. If we can find a different frame that we can look at it through, as in a challenge or an opportunity, we can change that, right? That's the framing effect. But as we're getting into that, one of the big steps to doing that is being able to differentiate fact from opinion. So remember that opinion is just something somebody thinks, right? And doesn't necessarily mean it's true or false or otherwise, right? It's just a thought. That's what an opinion is. A fact is something that's provable, that's quantitative, right? It's something that you can look at and have actual direct proof of. So a lot of times when I catch myself falling into negative thinking, the first thing that I ask myself is, are these thoughts really true, or are they just opinions? Is this absolutely provable, or is it just that I think it, right? Or maybe that somebody else thinks it around me, And then I try to not worry about the opinions, right? The whole point of confidence, you gotta not worry about other people's opinions. The only person's opinion you should worry about is your own. Now, at the same time, sometimes your own opinion of yourself can be really, really bad. And that's what we're talking about here. And this is where you got to start looking at those negative thoughts. Ask yourself, is it really me talking, or is this the voice of someone from my past? And then ask yourself, is it really true? But is it really, really true that you're terrible at this thing, that you're not a good parent, or that you're not a good friend, or whatever it is that you're thinking? You got to ask yourself, is it really true? Because a lot of people that I've had come to me and start saying stuff like, oh, well, I'm not a very good spouse, or I'm not a very good friend, or this, that, and the other. A lot of times, they're some of the most caring people that really try their best to keep other people lifted up. But then when one little thing goes wrong, they're suddenly like, oh, I'm terrible at this, right? This happens with our instructors too at Peaceful Warriors Martial Arts. I've had my several instructors several times come to me like, "Oh, I messed up real bad today. I messed up your classes. It was all my fault. I did a terrible job. And a lot of times these are classes that I was sitting there watching and I was like, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I saw you put a lot of care into what you were doing. I saw you, really making sure that everybody got the material they needed and making sure to show care for each one of the people. But they feel bad because they feel like it didn't go well, right? They feel like it didn't go well. But that's their opinion. Their opinion is that they felt like it didn't go well. Fact of it was is that the job got done. Everybody got paid attention to. Everyone got instruction, right? And you can do the same thing as a parent. If you think, "Oh, I'm a bad parent," you're like, "Well, did everybody get fed? Has everybody got a place to sleep? You know, has everybody got access to information, education, their needs, right? Has everybody got access to their needs?" In which case, oh, then you're not doing so bad. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of parents that don't even give that. So if you think of yourself as a bad parent because your child's upset with you something, or maybe you couldn't keep a promise or of some kind, or so you just feel like you're falling behind on all the tasks and the laundry's piling up and the dishes are piling up or whatever it is, ask yourself, yeah, maybe those things could be caught up on, but you have to ask yourself, does that really mean that you're a terrible parent or spouse? No. No, it doesn't. Like, because you got to remind yourself, you give support, you give care, you do your best to try to keep your promises, you do your best to make sure everybody gets fed. You do your best to make sure everybody has clothes and a good place to sleep, and gets good rest and things like that. And so there you go. So the thing is you have to ask yourself, is this a fact or is this an opinion? So the way you do that is asking yourself, can this actually be proven? Right? If I start to feel I'm bad at something, then I have to say, can this be proven? And you also have to ask, can it be proven wrong? So you have to start to force your brain to look at the other side of that factor. So let's say I'm like, well, I'm a bad parent. All right. And maybe I have a couple of things that I feel like prove that to be true. But I also have to ask myself, well, are there some things that would prove that to be not true? Right. And if you're really honest with yourself, you'll find that there's a lot of things that prove that to be not true as well. You might find yourself, well, there's a lot of things that you do that is good, like that are good for parenting and things along those lines. So if you're going to be honest with yourself, you have to learn to tell the difference between your own opinions of how you do something, your own opinions of yourself, and the actual facts. And if you have a hard time with that, find your most supportive teammates and ask them. Ask them how they feel or what they feel like, you are as a parent, as a friend, or whatever you're feeling bad about, right? Because a lot of times they have a completely different perspective than you, and they can argue the positive side for you. I use Mrs. Rose for this all the time. I use Miss Nana for this too. I feel like something goes really wrong, I'll express my opinion about how I'm so terrible at it or something like that. And then they will play that good teammate devil's advocate to the whole thing and be like, well, like you see these couple of negative things, but what about these three or four positive things? What about these other things? The fact that you're even being critical of yourself on this shows how much you care about what you're doing. And that alone is a positive thing that helps to disprove how you're feeling about yourself right now, how you're feeling, how you're so terrible, and things like that right now, right? So, fact versus opinion is a really, really helpful thing to combat negative thinking and self doubt. Another one that really helps for me is learning to distinguish what is real from what is not. And this one, it goes with the fact versus opinion because a lot of times opinions aren't really real. Facts are real, right? So it kind of goes with that. But what is real, what is not? And one of the things that really helps me do this is I constantly remind myself that the things that go on in my head, my thoughts themselves are not technically real. They're not tangible in reality until I put action to them, right? Until I start acting as if they are real. But in all reality, anything that anyone thinks in their head is not really real. It's an imagination. It is a falsified reality. And why it's important to be able to have that falsified reality is so that we can play out scenarios in our head to see how different choices would come about and which ones would be good and which ones would be not. So we have that ability so that, we can play out mentally decisions. And if we decide it's a bad decision, we can kill that decision off so that thought dies rather than us having actually made a mistake, right? But it gets really easy to start thinking of those imaginings as real things, but they're not really real. It's just like a story, like in a book or a movie. The things aren't real. Thoughts aren't real, right? The actions and the situations, those things may be real, right? So if I start to feel like I'm terrible at something because I struggled with a certain piece of it, then the fact is that maybe, yeah, maybe I do have a struggle with that piece of it. But I might be thinking that my struggle is worse than it really is. I might be thinking that I'll never be able to get it, but those are just opinions. Those are not necessarily facts. Instead, facts are if you keep trying consistently, if you keep using your Kaizen and constant improvement, change one thing at a time, you probably are going to be able to develop that skill over time. And that is a fact, right? It's just an opinion to think you would not be able to. That's just your opinion. And so, like I said, this goes back to fact and opinion. What is real? What is not? So, being able to differentiate what is real from what isn't. And thoughts aren't technically real. Our opinions aren't even technically real. They're just thoughts that we have, right? So then we can try to look at that situation that we're having negative thinking about, and we can try to ask ourselves, okay, what aspect of this is actually real? Like what aspect of this is measurable? What aspect of this is fully provable, And then once you can realize the parts of it that are real versus the parts of it that are opinion, like I'm never going to get it, or I don't think I'm going to get it, or, that kind of thing, then it gives you a better ability to look at both sides of that issue, which allows you to rationalize, right? As humans, we're rational human beings. We have the ability to rationalize, which means that we don't have to be necessarily stuck in the negative thinking and self-doubt if we can remind ourselves that a lot of those things are opinions and not necessarily based in reality, and then ask ourselves to look at what is actually based in reality, right? What is an actual fact about it? And fact of the matter is, if you struggle at something but you're still trying, you're ahead of all the people who aren't even trying. And there's a lot of those, right? It's easy to look at social media and think, well, everybody's getting ahead of me. It doesn't matter. And generally, they're not. A lot of times they're not even trying either. They're trying harder at putting up the opinion and the facade that they are than actually putting in any effort to where they are. So, yes, as Miss Rose said in this video, it's important to listen to your friends when they're helping you with the fact versus opinion. That's absolutely true. It's important to have friends you can bounce that off of. And you can say, well, I feel really bad about this. I'm thinking really negatively in this way, and allow them to have the opportunity to frame it in a different way for you, right? So I've had instructors like, well, I did terrible in this drill and I messed up your whole class. And then I'll say something like, well, think about how many times I've messed up in the 12 years, 14 years I've been teaching, right? A lot. A lot. And the thing is you can't change anything about the past. You can't do anything about that. What you can do is try to do better next time, right? And realize that as bad as you feel like it went, ask yourself, did you accomplish at least a part of the goal? Did you at least put in the practice? Did you at least give it an effort, right? And through that effort, you can realize that just by giving it that effort, even if the outcome fails, just by giving it that effort, then your negative thoughts about how terrible you are with something may not necessarily be true. They may just be opinions, right? Because the fact is, you're putting in the effort, and that shows how much that you care. It's basically what I was getting to with all that. What is real, what is not, fact, and opinion. And all these things are really, really important when we're working with ourselves or talking with ourselves in our inner monologue. If you think you can't, you won't. That's exactly it. If you think you can, you will. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. That's exactly it. Excuse me. So, talking to a friend and bouncing those ideas off of them and letting them help you frame it in a different way can be really, really helpful if you have a difficult time changing the way you look at it yourself. You have a difficult time reframing those negative thoughts yourself, right? So these are a couple of things that have really helped me over the years is like I said, grounding myself in reality first. So if my brain is making things seem really, really bad, then I try to just describe the actual facts about the situation as objectively as I possibly can, right? Yeah, as Ms. Rose said, half of teaching well is messing up on purpose so the students see what not to do. There's some truth to that. There's absolutely some truth to that. That's why we always try to demonstrate the wrong ways, the common wrong ways of doing things and things along those lines, right? So sorry, I got myself lost a little bit here. But so we talked about facts and opinion. We talked about what's real and what's not. And then the last thing that really helps with this is we need to talk about what we can control and what we can't. Fact of the matter is a lot of people and a lot of self doubt and negative thinking comes from this idea or this desire to control the outcome of a situation, to control the end result of an action. But if we can use our patience and learn to accept that we actually have very little control over the outcome of a situation, over how it ends up, because there's so many little factors at play and other people's decisions at play and other people's actions at play that you don't have full control of that. So then you have to ask yourself, what do you have full control over? Well, you have full control over your responses. You have full control over your values. You have full control over your character and how you choose to handle the hardships and setbacks that come. But you don't really have any control over the hardships and setbacks. You have control over your influence. You have control over how you might influence a situation trying to move towards a preferred outcome, but you always have to use your patience and acceptance to remember that you don't actually have full control of that outcome. So a lot of us want to put this either desire or fear on an outcome. Like I desire this outcome to happen, or I'm afraid that this outcome will happen. And it's that desire and that fear that causes a whole lot of emotional suffering, especially if it doesn't work out the way we'd hoped. You know what I mean? So, what I try to remind myself is the outcome of a situation, whether I might fear it or desire it, is outside of my control. What is in my control is how I influence things to try to move towards the desired outcome or to try to avoid the outcome that I fear, but I cannot control if that actual outcome happens. So I try not to spend too much extra time worrying about the outcome or desiring a certain outcome, and instead spend the time and the effort and the energy focusing on what can I do right now to maybe make a better opportunity for that preferred outcome to happen. That's it. Thoughts become action. That's it. Right. So, but until thoughts become action, they're not real. You know, until thoughts become action, until you actually do something with them, they're not real. So if you're, like I said, we're going back to self doubt and negative thinking. If you have that self doubt and negative thinking, those thoughts aren't technically real until you start taking action to them. Now, if you start acting like you're bad at something, you start like you think you're not a good parent, so then you start acting like a bad parent, right? And that's what happens. You put too much focus on that negative thought, too much focus on thinking you're not a good parent, or I'm a terrible martial artist, or I'm not good at my job, or whatever it is. The more you think about it, the more you're going to start acting like you're not, right? The more you're going to start acting that way, and then the harder it's going to be to come back from that, right? So one of the key points, like I say, is fact versus opinion. Try not to give too much thought on the negative, and instead turn your thoughts into what actions you would like. Turn your thoughts into what kind of influence you would like to have. Turn your thoughts to the things that are in your control, and do your best to accept whatever the outcome is. Have a love of what happens, right? There used to be an old Greek term for this that was coined by, oh gosh, I can't remember who. I know Pierre Hadot used it when he wrote his books. But amor fati, which just means love of one's fate, right? To fall in love with the idea of whatever happens, happens, right? It is what it is. We have all kinds of sayings that mean the same thing, right? To accept the outcome for what it is, and just at least be proud of yourself for what effort you put forward, right? So instead of thinking about an outcome and be like, well, I'm such a bad parent, start focusing on whatever effort you put forward. Well, I did try to do this, and I have been trying to do this, and I could do this better. Focus on what's in your control. Try to let go and accept what's not in your control. Just endure and accept what's not in your control, because there is nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about the outcomes of things in the past. There's very little you can do about outcomes of things in the future. Like I say, you can do some things to influence your preferred outcomes, as you probably should, but you don't have full control over whether that's what happens or not, whether the thing you fear happens or not, whether the thing you desire happens or not. So you have to go into things. I always tell people, go into things not being afraid to fail. When I talk about going to tournaments to our students, I always talk about don't worry about winning, don't worry about losing. It ain't about winning and losing, right? It's the process. So don't go into it wanting to win, and don't go into it being afraid to lose. Instead, go into it focused on what you control. Go into it and say, I'm going to play my game. I'm going to put my best effort forward. I'm going to do what I train to do. I'm not going to fall into anyone else's games. You know what I mean? That's what's in your control. So I tell my competition students all the time, focus on these things that are in your control. Don't put so much thought into desiring the win or fearing the loss. Instead, put all your thought into putting your best effort forward, period. And then what happens, happens, and accept it. It's not a big deal. You know what I mean? So, oh, Shirley's in a meeting. Sorry, Shirley. Brandy said combating negative thoughts with positive affirmations. Yeah, that can help. Positive mantras. Talk about it with our fighters. Don't play their game plan. Ours is solid. That's it. I always tell mine. Because like when someone really wants to win bad enough, and then they get into a match, and within 30 seconds or a minute, they start to feel like they're behind. What I notice is they will begin to try to copy what the other person is doing that is beating them. And fact of the matter is they play that game better than you play that game because that's the game they trained to play. So they're going to continue to beat you, and they're going to continue to beat you worse if you keep trying to play their game. Our game is good too. You've got to stay in our game, the game that you've trained to play, and don't let getting a little bit behind in the points or whatever the case is start making you try to copy their game. You're not going to be able to play their game better than them, but you can play your game better than them, right? And that's what, and a lot of that starts with going into each match not really ready to accept win or lose, right? Not really emotionally invested in whether the desire to win or the fear of loss. Instead, being purely emotionally invested in just the process itself, the effort that you put forth, and playing your own game. You know, I talk to my fighters about this a lot. It's a big one for us because when I have someone lose, it's because nerves get the best of them. And they start trying to copy what the other person is doing. When I have people win, it's because they're playing and they're playing their game and they're being goofy about it and they're not fighting like the other people are fighting. That's when it goes well, right? Ego plays a role in that. That's absolutely right, Mr. Fisher, because a lot of us desire certain outcomes because of our ego, because we want to look good to others. And fact of the matter is, our ego, our desire to look good to others is in itself valuing other people's opinions. When you begin to value other people's opinions to the point that your ego makes it necessary for you to win, like your ego wants you to win so bad, then it's going to make the loss feel awful too. Might make the win feel great, right? You get all the praise, but then the loss is going to feel awful too. And the fact of the matter is, any game that you play, you're not going to win 100% of the time. I always tell people there's no such thing as an undefeated champion in anything. They might be undefeated this year, they might be undefeated in this league, right? But everyone loses on their way up the ladder. Everyone loses a lot. And you got to learn to take that in stride. You got to learn to accept that. And a big part of that is, and you can do this with anything, is learning to accept whatever happens, learning to accept the outcome, and instead put your focus on the process, put your focus on your effort, put your focus on the way you're going to influence things, the way you want to influence things, and let go of any fear or desire of how it comes out. Sure, you might have a preferred outcome and a non-preferred outcome, but try not to get too emotionally invested in that because those outcomes are not completely in your control. The only thing that's in your control is the effort you put into it, right? So if I walk into a martial arts match or a fight, I can control the effort I put in, but I can't control the other person's effort. I can't control, I can influence them, but I can't control them. And so there's a lot of things outside of my control. And I find one of the best things for my mental health is to try to stop desiring and fearing things that I don't have 100% control over, and instead focus on the things that I have 100% control over. And the only thing I have 100% control over is me, my actions, my character, my values, and my thoughts, right? And like I said at the beginning, let's go a quick recap. We talked about fact versus opinion. That's really helpful when we're dealing with negative thinking. Learning what is real and what is not. Thoughts are not real. That's helpful when it comes to negative thinking, right? What can we control and what we can't? Again, very helpful when we're dealing with negative thinking and things along those lines. Keeps us grounded in a sense of reality. All these things are things I've used to manage bipolar depression for over a decade now. And I did most of that unmedicated. And these were like three of the five top things, right? That really helped me out. One of the other ones was whenever I start feeling anxiety or fear or things along those lines, reminding myself that the same brain chemicals are in charge of excitement that are in charge of fear and anxiety. So it's all in how we frame it mentally. So if I'm framing it mentally as something that I'm afraid of or something that's making me anxious, then if I can change that frame by telling myself this isn't anxiety, I'm really just excited. This is an opportunity for me to be excited about. Then it changes the way I look at my anxiety, and my anxiety begins to look a whole lot more like excitement, and then it becomes enthusiasm, right? So that's another one, and that's how we use the framing effect. You use the framing effect to change the way that you look at different things along those lines. I'm just checking to make sure I covered everything. Control. And the other thing I want to talk about, like martial arts really helps with a lot of this stuff, right? Because martial arts isn't just about winning fights; it's about winning internal battles, right? There's a lot about martial arts that's about internal battles and about being able to win internal battles. So that's one of the main reasons I'm thinking about this, or talking about this. But there's a mirror, right, between winning a real external battle and an internal battle. A lot of the same principles apply, right? So a lot of these same things I'm talking about also apply when you are in a match, when you're in a fight, and things along those lines, right? We talked about what you can control, what you can't. You learn that real quick when you're trying to become a fighter because you can't let each hit stay with you and affect how you respond to the next thing. You know what I mean? You've got to roll that off. You got to let that pain go. You got to just let it go because there's nothing you can do about it after the fact that you got hit. But if you keep thinking about it, then you're going to start having a bit of a fear towards being hit like that again, and then you're going to become easy to manipulate. You're going to become easy to read. You're going to become easy to manipulate, and that's just not a good position to be in. As Mr. Fisher says, if you win for others, you're winning for the wrong reason. That's exactly it, right? And that's where that ego comes in. There's nothing wrong with wanting to win. I'm not trying to say that. What I am saying is if you let your ego get you emotionally invested in that win, like you want to win so bad, that's usually a sign that you're wanting to win because you want to look good to somebody. And that, yeah, that's the wrong reasons to go for it. And that's going to set you up for failure. That's going to feel so bad that you might even want to quit, right? So there's nothing wrong with having a desire to win, but remembering that that win, the only thing you can control in that win is your effort, and you can't control everything about that situation to make absolutely sure that you win. So being so emotionally invested in the win that if you don't, you get terribly upset. That's not going to be helpful, right? You've got to, you got to want to win. You got to want to put your best effort forward, but you also have to be like walk into that and be have patience and be accepting of, well, I may lose, but if I lose, I'm going to do it with my best effort. If I lose, I'm going to walk away still proud because I'm going to make sure I lay it all out there and I'm going to play my game. So what if I lose as long as I do my best? You know what I mean? Because that means I'm going to get better each time. And I might even learn something from my opponent. That's another thing in martial arts, right? We're a little weird because we make friends with people that kick us in the head and things like that because they teach us places that we can improve, right? And negative thinking can do the same. Not going to lie. Negative thinking can show you places where you can improve. But when we allow that negative thinking to overtake our emotional responses or to take control of our emotional responses, then we're going to have a real tough time, right? So that's when we're having a real problem with self-doubt and things like that. You got to ask yourself, is this just my opinion or is this something that's provable? And even if it is provable, let's say that negative thought is provable, you have to ask yourself, is there any evidence to the contrary? Is there any evidence that proves that I'm not terrible at this or that I will get good at this or something along those lines? This is where you bounce back to your good friends. You can always tell your good friends because your good friends will be the ones who look at the positive aspect for you when you're looking at the negative. They'll be the ones where you start talking about these negative thoughts you have, and they'll be the ones that are like, well, you're forgetting about all this effort that you put in. You're forgetting about, you're obviously showing how much you care. You're forgetting about the fact that you can't be perfect every day. You're forgetting about what all these other times you've done well. That's another thing Miss Rose does. I get real self-negative about my teaching or about this studio or about our success or something like that. If something starts to fall, Mrs. Rose's first thing is to start going, well, but what about this thing we overcame 5 years ago? What about this thing we overcame 7 years ago? What about where we were 3 years ago? What about all the amazing, things we've managed to accomplish since then? What about all the great decisions, right? One bad decision or one messed up day or one bad day doesn't negate all the positives, right? From all the years past, doesn't negate all the process that was made along the way, right? One bad day doesn't. And this is where I get into it. I'm going to write a blog about this soon, but where I get into talking to kids about quitting, we often have kids come in and say they want to quit. And guys, I got no problems with people quitting, but got to quit for the right reasons, right? And this is a big one for me because a lot of times kids quit, they don't necessarily have a good reason, or their reason is because someone has become overcritical of them, so it's not fun anymore, right? So when I talk to a child about when they want to quit and I ask them, why they want to quit, if they say something like, it's hard, or I'm struggling with this, or something along those lines, then the first thing I do is point out the effort and encourage the fact that they've been putting in effort, even if they are still struggling with that thing. And then I point out that you should never quit on a bad day, because if you quit when you're feeling bad about your performance or bad about something like that, that's something that can lead to feeling guilt later, right? You can end up feeling guilty about it. You can end up feeling a little bit shame about it, right? Instead, you've got to keep going through the thing that's hard, keep working until you get the thing that's difficult for you. And then when you're having a good day and you feel better or good about your ability to do it, then ask yourself if you still want to quit. Then you still want to quit, cool, right? Then you still want to quit, cool. But I find that the majority of the time that we run into this situation, it has to do with a parent in the background who is correcting their kid and being overly critical of their kid after they leave classes, right? Where the kid will have great time in classes and they'll love what they're doing, they'll love what they're learning, but then they start feeling like they're not good at something or they're struggling with something, and then suddenly they want to quit. There's a lot of times, I mean, more times than I care to admit, there's a parent in the background there that's not encouraging and supporting them, that's not being there like, well, I'm proud of your effort and I'm glad you keep trying and recognizing that effort. And instead, the parent's like, well, why can't you do it? You were doing it right yesterday. Why don't you do it this way? Blah blah blah. You need to do this. You need to do that. In fact of the matter is let the coaches coach the kids. You know what I mean? Let the coaches give the corrections, because the kids need somebody to be the support. And that's what the parents come out to. Now, we support as best we can too, but we also have to give correction. So they really need the parents to be the support. So if we're correcting them a lot in a particular day, instead of continuing to talk about our corrections all the way home, you should instead be like, hey, I'm really proud of your effort though. Like, you're out there trying. A lot of people wouldn't even try, and encouraging the positive sides of it. So a lot of times if we're correcting and then the parents correcting, that adds a whole level of no one is proud of me, so it's not fun anymore, so I want to quit, right? That's one of the biggest reasons I see that kids want to quit. Usually comes down to no one's being supportive of their activity. Like, they're still having fun, but as soon as they struggle with something and they're getting correction here, the parents aren't necessarily supporting either. They're trying to help give the correction. Now, they think they're helping, but in all reality, what you're doing is surrounding the child with nothing but corrections, nothing but reminders of what they're struggling with. And somebody has to take the job of reminding them of what they're good at, of what the good effort is doing, and things along that. And that's really the parents' job there, right? Is making sure that they get the encouragement on their way home. That's one of the biggest reasons I see kids want to quit. The other reason is I see kids, well, I just don't want to do it anymore. And it comes down to, well, I say, well, what are you going to do instead? And they'll say, well, I'll sit at home and play video games. I will, whatever. And it's like, that's not a good enough reason to quit either. Now, if you tell me you're quitting because you want to try gymnastics, awesome, bud. Awesome. Go for it. You're telling me you want to quit because you want to play baseball. Hey, man, cool. Try as many things as you can. You're telling me you want to quit because you want to do band or be on the academic team or whatever. Awesome, man. Those are great activities. I'm not even going to try to talk you out of that. But if you're just trying to quit so you can be lazy, right? Then no, that's not a good reason. Or because it's hard, that's not a good reason. So that's my two things about quitting, right? And I would say do the same thing to yourself if you're having negative self-thoughts about something you're doing. While you're thinking about quitting, ask yourself, one, am I just quitting because this is hard right now? And remind yourself that never quit on a bad day. You might regret it. Instead, wait till you're on a good day. Wait till you get past the bad thing, and then ask yourself if you want to quit. Number two, make sure that you have a support around you that you talk to. If the people you talk to in your life are critical, like you are, of the things that you're doing, then you've got the wrong kind of teammates. If you're critical of yourself, you need teammates that are going to be supportive, that are going to counter that criticism, and make sure that those are the ones you're talking to. Or if you're dealing with a kid as a parent, be the one that counters that self criticism, right? The kids know when they mess up. The kids know when they mess up. So, give them the support while they're trying to correct themselves, right? So that's my big things. You can quit, just don't quit on a bad day, and quit for good reasons. You know what I mean? And a lot of that has to do with negative thinking too, and a lot of that has to do with the support network they have at home. So let's see. Brandy says, I appreciate my mom for pushing me to continue softball during my times being scared or just not wanting to switch. Yeah. And I feel a bit of regret for quitting sophomore year because I took the summer off and felt inadequate. Yeah, well, and it happens, right? That happens. But yeah, that's, guilt often comes from it. Now that encouragement, what I was just talking about, like with parents, or if you have the right good friends when you're negative thinking, you go talk to your friends and they're countering with all the positives, and but recognizing your effort and talking about, but look at the progress you've made so far. Can't just let this one little thing stop you. Look at all these other things you learned and things like that. Those are great motivators to push people to continue. Those are great motivators to push kids to continue. But if they're getting corrected in here and then they're going home and they're being criticized all the way home for not doing one thing right, then they're going to start thinking that one thing that they're bad at makes them terrible at the whole thing, and so then they're going to want to quit, right? But if they're getting corrected here and then they're being self-critical and feeling bad on the way home about how bad they are at something, but then they have a parent or a sibling or somebody that's like, yeah, but look how far you've come. Look at all this other cool stuff you can do. Look at all this other cool stuff you've learned. You'll learn this too. Don't worry. Give it time. That is such a better motivator, a much, much better motivator. Mr. Fisher, parents tend to get lazy and not have time. Now that does happen too. We occasionally have we occasionally get the don't have time. A lot of that usually comes with other sports schedules and stuff, which I totally understand. And occasionally there's a financial issue, which for you guys that don't know, anytime there's a financial issue at your home, we will work with you on a temporary basis on some income-based financial assistance. We've always done that. Uh, Now, if we offer that and there's still something else, I get it. I understand. But yeah, that Mr. Fisher, you're not wrong. That tends to be one of those things as well. Uh, oh, Miss Rose is talking to him, says 100%. We just need some downtime, is one I've heard a lot in the past. I get wanting a break from a busy routine, but it does not always teach good lessons. It doesn't teach good self care. That's right, because good self care is a basic routine. So yeah, the just needing downtime. I don't want to do anything. Like I said, that's always a rough reason to quit. Now, that's a good reason to take a short break, though, right? Like say, hey, why don't you take a week off? Just a week off, a couple nights off, spend some time with your family, and then come back in next week and let's talk about it, right? When I was working the phones in here in the early days, that's what I would do. When people said they wanted to quit for more downtime or more family time, which I understand, I would say, hey, let's uh let's prorate your payment and take 1 week off this month. And why don't you go ahead and take that week off? I'm not going to charge you anything for it, or take a night off or a couple nights off, spend some time with your family, come in next week, and then tell me if you still feel the same way or if you're recharged and ready to go. Because sometimes we do need a little break from our routine, but any longer than a week is too much. Then we're going to start becoming a little bit more lazy about it. I don't know how you guys feel about that, Miss Rose, Mr. Fisher, but that's the way I used to. That's the way I used to kind of talk about it. I'd say, well, instead of going out altogether, how about we not charge you for 1 week this month, and how about you take a couple extra nights off, spend some time with your family, wind down, get some rest, and then come back in next week and let's see how you feel about getting back started and getting going to it. Right, a few days off can be a good thing. Right, to a week off, that can be a good thing every now and then for proper training, because sometimes you need a reset. Sometimes your training's gone a little off the rails. Sometimes your negative thinking about your training's gone a little off the rails. And sometimes you need a week to just let your body recoup, let your mind recoup, and then you'll be in a much better frame of mind to come back in, right? That I totally understand, and that I am completely cool with. It's that total quit, right? It's the total quit. And like I say, it's one thing if you're going to go do another activity or if there's some other things going on, but these are just my feelings about it. And I try to stick Axel to the same things. You know what I mean? But I also understand busy schedule stuff, right? Like I'm doing everything I can so that Axel can play soccer. But that makes it difficult because we have Saturday classes and then there's tournaments during the soccer season. And then on top of that, Axel will have a soccer game all on the same day. And we don't have enough people to cover all of that. You know what I mean? In which case, we'll probably have to close classes from time to time so one of us can hit the tournament and the other one can hit the soccer game. We're trying to do all we can to keep backing this kind of thing up. But I do also understand that there is only so many days in the week and so many hours in the day, right? So there is that too. There is a point where some people get stretched too thin doing just too many activities and need to drop one just so they have one night off a week. That I totally get too. I totally understand that. Ms. Rose says I do use that and actively talk to our families about self care, which is what I said in the past. Yeah, yeah. So that's it. That's the way I used to do it. Anyway, talked a lot about being self-critical, so I'm just going to bring this back to honesty because honesty is our word of the week this week. So when you're talking about honesty, you have to look at the fact versus opinion. Your opinion can be honest, but it can still be an opinion, right? And you have to ask yourself, am I giving this opinion to myself how I would give it to a friend? Or am I being very brutal and mean about this opinion? You know what I mean? And I ask myself that if I'm going to be honest with a student, if I'm going to correct a student, we have a particular way we correct students here. We use positive, negative, positive method. We say something they did right, and then something that could be better, and then something they did right again, or some kind of encouragement again, right? And I feel like that's really really important because I feel like in honest correction, sometimes being honest, you have to point out something negative, you have to point out a bad behavior or things like that, but you can do it tactfully, you can do it in a nice and encouraging way. The trick to being tactful is to show them how to improve, to give them a road to redemption. I always talk about this when it comes to kids and bad behavior. When you're correcting that bad behavior, don't just tell them what they're doing wrong. You have to tell them what to do right. And that's the way we correct in here. We don't talk about what you're doing wrong. We talk about how to do it right. There's a big difference, right? It's subtle, but there's a big difference between telling someone what they did wrong and telling someone how to do it correctly, right? We talk about that a lot with correcting kids, with correcting anybody, any of our students really. And you have to ask yourself when you're being self-critical mentally, am I being tactful like that? Am I telling myself that this is something I need to improve on and this is how I can improve? Or am I just being brutal about it and just saying, "Oh, I suck and I'm terrible," and all these things and all that, right? And if I had a friend that was that brutal with me, I wouldn't be my friend for very long. I wouldn't talk to him for very long. If I had a friend that pointed out my faults in a tactful manner and helped me find a way to improve on them, yeah, that's someone I'm gonna spend a lot of time with. And that's something we really focus on in the martial arts culture, right? Is spending time with our training partners that, yes, show us where we can improve, but show us how to improve, right? Not just berate us for where we're at, but instead show us how to get better. Now you have to ask yourself, do you talk to yourself as a friend? As in, when you are being honest about something that's going wrong, are you being tactful about it and talking about how to do it better with yourself? Or are you just being brutal, right? Just to make yourself feel bad and start a pity party and things along those lines. So if you can learn to do the one and not the other with your honesty with yourself, that's the fifth thing I was going to bring up about dealing with negative self-talk and self-doubt. So Mr. Fisher says, in this cancel quit world, if it's hard, I quit. Oh, I know, man. And that's one of the things, Mr. Fisher, that I think I think is I think martial arts are an important activity for now and for the future and for our future generations because it teaches them how to move through difficulties, because it teaches them how to deal with hard things, because it teaches them how to cope with different situations, because it teaches them how to be self-aware of their emotions, and because it teaches them how to have that control, right? How to have that control of their emotions. And it teaches them what I like to call emotional intelligence. So it teaches them not only the ability to be self-aware and control their own emotions, but to begin to recognize the emotions in others and how to influence them. And that is a big key in martial arts because, the trick is you learn to fight, but the goal is to not have to fight. The tools to defend yourself and the tools to not have to. So if you can have the emotional intelligence and self-control to control your emotions and be able to read another person's emotions, you can also find ways to influence their emotions to calm the situation and to avoid it erupting into something crazy. Be the right finder, praise, correct, praise. Yeah, we call it sandwich criticism. Uh, praise, correct, praise. And how we do it is like, well, I loved your effort on that round kick. And that round kick's going to get better as you learn to rotate that hip a little farther on your base leg. And and man, you are starting to get some power out of it, right? Just praise, correct, praise all the time. Um, Self audits are important to creating better cycles. That's true. That's true. But this self audit, you can't just be mean to yourself. You can't just throw out those mean opinions all the time, right? You got to balance that. You got to balance that. You balance it through fact versus opinion. What's real? What's not? What's in your control? What's not? Right? The framing effect. How you're looking at the situation, and are you being tactful in the way that you're speaking to yourself about it, or are you being brutal in the way that you're speaking to yourself about it? Anyway, I hope this stuff helps somebody out there that's been watching these videos. I want to thank everybody that's been watching us on both Facebook and Instagram. This is also going to be our next Teammate Talks episode. If you follow our podcast, which you can get our Teammate Talks podcast by searching hashtag Teammate Talks anywhere you get your podcast. And you can also find it on our website, in our blog, in which we have a new website. That's the other announcement I forgot about. I was really proud of. We have a new website. We've worked about the last week on completely recoding it. It's teammatewarriors.com, and our blog is up on that website, and it has a podcast thing pinned to the top, so you can find our podcast there, as well as browse our programs and things along those lines. So we're really loving the new website so far. I'd love to see what your guys' thoughts are. I've shared a couple of the blog articles I moved over, such as the one about managing anxiety and depression through martial arts training. I think that was one of my favorite articles I've ever written. It's a wonderful one. We talked about a lot of the same things right here today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump off here because I got a lot of stuff to do. But until I see you guys again, be the best teammate you can be. Be the best at being you.